right, so last week, we'll just buzz through the slides super fast. We talked about what time did these things happen in Ruth chapter 1, and we said that it was when there was a famine in the land, and that was a physical famine. We talked about some significance of that famine and when that may have actually happened with the Midianites when they came in. In Ruth chapter 1, verse 2, we said, what's in a name? And we learned that we will learn what Elimelech means. We will learn what Naomi means, which that's the one that right now is very important to remember, that it means gracious, or one who has been dealt with graciously, one who's been shown grace. And then Mahlon, Chilion, remember they're weakly and they're pining. And what's Elimelech? God is king, I think. And then Ephrathites, we talked about how that was used to speak of those who were from Bethlehem, and they left to go to Moab. We talked about the danger of going to Moab, and that this is a foreign territory. This is outside the land of Judah, so these are not people who worship the one true God. These are people who worship pagan gods, and that's dangerous. And look what happened. They intermarried with Moabite women. The sons of Elimelech and Naomi married these Moabite women, and the danger there, and we looked very kind of deeply at some of the passages where God says not to do this and why you shouldn't do this, and that the danger is you'll start worshiping pagan gods. And we saw that happen with Solomon. We saw that this happens even when you're king and when you're the wisest person on earth. This happens. And so we talked about that danger of moving to Moab. How long did they stay in Moab? We saw that it was about 10 years. We talked about how that makes sense with if it was this time when the Midianites were ravaging the land in Jerusalem, that would fit in line, that they might stay in Moab for 10 years and eventually hear about how things were better now or getting better in the land of Judah, go back to Bethlehem 10 years later. The Midianites ravaged the land for 7 years. Well, it would make sense that it might take them a few years to get back. Why did they go back to Bethlehem? We talked about how there could be a variety of reasons, and ultimately it would be a good decision, but really the reason they left Bethlehem was because there was no food. There was a famine. There was no bread in the house of bread. And so the reason that they were going back was the same reason in reverse. Now they heard there was food in Bethlehem, so they went back. Ultimately, that is why Ruth decided to go back. And so we talked about the lesson from no bread in the house of bread. Bethlehem means house of bread. There was famine in the land. There's some irony in there that not always does a name indicate what is actually true, and we need to make sure that when it comes to us wearing the name Christian, that our name matches our behavior, matches the kind of person that we are. So that was what we covered last week. So let's jump in this week. We'll pick up where we left off, but I do want to read actually all of the text before we jump into talking about from verse 7 on what those things mean. So Ruth chapter 1, starting in verse 1, says, Now it came about in the days when the judges governed that there was a famine in the land. And a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife, Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem and Judah. Now they entered the land of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They took for themselves Moabite women as wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and the woman was bereft of her 2 children and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard that in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So she departed from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the household of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, No, but we will surely return with you to your people. But Naomi said, "Return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters. Go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me." And they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Then she said, "Behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me." When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So they both went until they came to Bethlehem, and when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me?" So Naomi returned, and with her Ruth, the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, who returned from the land of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. All right, so picking up at verse 7 here. Last week we went up to verse 6, so picking up at verse 7, we're asking the question, why did these daughters-in-law plan to return with Naomi? Verse 7 says, "She departed from the place where she was, and her two daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah." So they're leaving Moab, the place where she was, the place where they were with her. Her two daughters-in-law with her, it says. That's Orpah and Ruth. Remember, they themselves are widows. So there's a couple things that we could probably think of if we're just kind of, spitballing off the top of our head. Why might they do this? Why might they be in a position where they felt like doing this? Well, we might say, well, they're younger women. What's left in Moab for them? Maybe they're just seeking a change of scenery. Maybe they think it sounds nice. Maybe they think, they're younger and they're up for a little adventure, Why not? Why not go for it? It could be something like that. Maybe they're thinking, well, we left our Moabite families, and maybe it's true that, we don't know this, but perhaps the Moabite families that they left to join together with Elimelech's sons in marriage, maybe those families, having left them, things didn't go so well. Maybe they left behind some chaos and some animosity because they were going to leave and forsake the pagan gods to follow the one true God and join the Israelite way of life. Maybe there was some of that going on. It's possible. Maybe they were afraid that if they went back to those Moabite families, they wouldn't even be accepted. So, gut instinct says, I'll go with sweet old Naomi here. Maybe that's what they were thinking. Maybe they thought they needed, I think this is where my mind goes straight to, that maybe they just thought they needed each other at this point in time. 3 widows at this point now. 3 widows in different stages of life. Maybe they thought they'd do better sticking together, being able to care for one another. And then, of course, there is the reality that they would have had some level of obligation to care for Naomi as their mother-in-law, despite the fact that she was a widow. Because she was a widow, they needed to care for her. And despite the fact that they did not have her sons as their husbands anymore, they would need to care for her in some way. They would need to make provision for her somehow. There would be an obligation as her daughters-in-law to care for her. So there could have been a variety of reasons, but I think there's a little more to it, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on when we discuss why Ruth clung rather than kissing her goodbye. Because that's what Orpah did, right? I mean, literally, it says she kissed her. She kissed her goodbye, and Ruth clung to her instead. So we'll talk about the good reasons for wanting to go back when we get to the point of talking about Ruth, who actually did go back. For now, let's move on to verses 8 and 9, asking the question, why did Naomi try to send them back home? Why did Naomi say, don't come with me? Why did she try to send them back to Moab? It says in verses 8 and 9, it says, and Naomi said to her her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the household of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. Naomi loved these women. She loved these women. She believed that their own mothers, who likely had husbands themselves, could take better care, could provide for their needs better than she could provide. Think about Naomi. Let me get these straight. It's important. Think about Naomi returning back to a land she hasn't been in for 10 years, without a husband, without sons to care for her. What means did she have to provide for these women? So she felt like what would be best for them. I'm sure she'd love the company. I'm sure she'd love to not return to Bethlehem alone, but she loved them enough. She was a caring and conscientious mother-in-law enough that she said, "You guys would be better off going back home." And she gave a nod here to the fact that they could get new husbands, right? She said, "May the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her own husband." So she knew that they had a chance of finding a new husband. She made it clear, we read in the text after this, she made it clear, "Guys, it's harder for me than it is for you. Like, you can start over. You can get a fresh start." And that's what she was hopeful that they would have. She knew they were young enough, they would fare better in finding husbands than she would be, and those husbands could provide better for their physical needs, their emotional needs, their relational needs. Naomi was hopeful that they could get this new start going back to Moab. As hard as it was, Naomi is only trying to send these women back to their Moabite families because she loves Orpah and she loves Ruth. That's why she's doing it. She's not mean. She's not rude. She's not so deep in grief that she's just like, "I don't want to be around anybody." She had reasons, and that reason was love. Moving on, we're going to skip a few verses here, looking at the second part of verse 13. We're asking the question, what's the meaning of the remark about the hand of the Lord, right? In verse 13, she said, the Bible says, it quotes her as saying, "Would you therefore wait until these children in her womb are grown," right? These are the verses we skipped about. She's like, even if I had a husband tonight and was pregnant with children now, would you wait? It doesn't make any sense. She says, "Would you wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying?" She says, "No, my daughters, for it's harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me." Obviously, Naomi feels like what has happened to her is action from God. She feels that these extremely difficult events were brought on by God, were brought on to her, were inflicted upon her by God. She believes God is working against her. Now, it's natural for people to start wondering what they've done to upset God, to seemingly lift his hand up against them, right? When bad things happen, we know, even though we may have matured to the point of not doing it very often ourselves, we know that it is normal for people to say, "Why would God allow this to happen?" Or, "What did I do to upset God?" People will what's the word I'm looking for? They will put the blame on God in a sense. And even if they're not blaming God, like saying, "God, why are you doing this to me?" they believe that he is the one behind it. They believe that he is the one, that the power that is working against them is coming from God. It's natural for people to do this. If you want to, flip over to Job chapter 4. Job chapter 4. Job chapter 4, Job chapter 8, Job chapter 11, you can read about the advice that Job's wonderful friends gave him. But every single one of them accused Job of doing evil, didn't they? Isn't that nice? Isn't that wonderful? But isn't that what people think? People think that, clearly God is upset with you about something. We joke when people say something or do something that we're like, "Ooh, I wouldn't do that." We're like, "I won't stand too close to you," right? Because a lightning bolt is, going to come from the heavens and strike them, right? It's a joke. It's a kind of a statement that we'll use sometimes, look out, lightnings might strike and things like this. Well, people seriously honestly, though, sometimes believe that God's going to punish people, and that if anything bad's happening to you, well, that's what he's doing. God is punishing you. Job chapter 4, Job chapter 8, Job chapter 11, you can read about Job's wonderful friend's advice, but I think Job chapter 4, verse 8 summarizes what most of them were thinking. In Job chapter 4, verse 8, one of his friends, in the midst of what he's explaining how he sees things, he says, according to what I have seen, those who plow iniquity and those who sow trouble harvest it. So what's he telling him? You know, if you said, hey, the way I see it, people who do bad things have bad things happen to them, and you're talking to a guy who's had a lot of tragedy in his life and lost a lot of things, including family and possessions and all kinds of stuff like that. Like, you're talking to somebody like that and you say something like that, what do you mean? Apparently you've been a bad boy, right? Apparently all this stuff that's happened to you is because all this stuff you've been doing to others. Apparently there's something you're not telling us that's brought all this on you, right? According to what I have seen, those who plow iniquity and those who sow trouble harvest it. You reap what you sow, Job. Apparently you've been sowing the seed to harvest what you're getting right now. Look at John chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. Gospel of John, chapter 9. John chapter 9, starting in verse 1. Got it? All right, John chapter 9, verse 1, it says, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. This is Jesus. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? It kind of sounds like, according to what I have seen, those who plow iniquity and those who sow trouble harvest it, right? They look at a guy who's got a difficult way to go, and they say, so who's the sinner, him or his parents? How did he get this way? Why did God strike him like this? And Jesus says, it was, verse 3, Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned, nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Guys, at the very least, we know that every bad or difficult thing that happens in life is not necessarily because somebody sinned. Some things happen so that God can prove his power, so that God can show his power, so that, what's it say? So that the works of God might be displayed in him or in those situations, okay? So when bad things happen, don't assume that God is working against you. I mean, if you have done wrong, there is a chance that God might let you reap what you sow. By all means, might let those things happen. But the other side of that coin is God is also allowing something to happen that you might be able to create beauty out of, that he might be able to turn into something that proves his power, proves his ability. It might be the way you handle it. Others might see that and go, wow, there must be something to this following God thing, because I don't know how they're still standing after they went through what they went through. You know what I mean? So at the very least, we know that God is not always punishing you for something you've done. There should not be instances where you're going around like, what have I done? What have I done? Things are going so badly. What could I have done? Like, you should know. Like, if you've done something so bad that God is making your life that bad, you should know. That's not how God is working. God is not working in that way. God allows things to happen, but God does not tempt anybody. God does not. He's not the author of death. He's not killing people off. He's not creating these kind of chaotic situations in your life. But he allows them for particular reasons, and we'll talk about that. That's going to be one of our deeper lessons we're going to touch on here tonight in a minute. I do want to cover Romans 8:28 for just a second. You guys all know this passage, even if you don't know it off the top of your head when I say Romans 8:28, but it's God works all things to good, right? We like to quote that from time to time. Romans 8:28, word for word, what it says is, and we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Now, the fact that it says all things he works to good means that some things apparently aren't always good, right? All things are all things, good and bad, right? The fact that it says all things, not that God takes good things and gives them to you. God takes good things and points them out to you so that you know There's good things. God takes good things and gives them to you so that all you've got is good things. No, it says God takes all things, good and bad, mediocre, okay, so, I don't really know what to think about them, all things, and works them together for good. Maybe not necessarily immediately, maybe not necessarily in a way that is super good for you, but for ultimate good. Sometimes a struggle, like I said before, sometimes somebody getting to see you go through a struggle faithfully, that's a struggle for you, but it's good for them. It brings them to the Lord. Ultimately, it is for good. So I don't think anyone in this room probably is often guilty of misinterpreting this text and saying like, well, I feel like if Romans 8:28 was true, I wouldn't have this going on in my life. I think we're mature enough, most of us in this room, we know this, but I just want to point this out. This is something that Naomi is struggling with. Naomi believes God is working against her because bad things have happened, because something negative has happened in her life, albeit very tragic. I'm not dismissing that. Very tragic. But she believes immediately that means God is mad at me about something. Let's move on to verses 16 through 18. What kind of commitment did Ruth make to Naomi here? It says, after we hear that Orpah kissed her mother-in-law and head on down the highway, verse 16 says, but Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you, for where you go I will go, and where you lodge I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. That's where we get the till death do you part phrase, by the way. Verse 18, when she saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So what kind of commitment did she make? Well, Ruth was not to be turned away, right? She said in verse 16, she shows her commitment. She says, do not urge me to leave, right? Don't let me go. I loved the little Bible study that I was doing just a little bit ago before we started this study. Some of you were walking in while we were finishing up. I was asking them about the next lesson, like do they want to do this next, or do they want to do that? And I loved their answer. The gentleman there that I was studying with, of the two folks there, he goes, well, I'll be honest with you, I'm enjoying this a lot, and I'm afraid that if we skip that lesson, it'll be over quicker. Like I don't want to get too far ahead to where then we stop sooner, because I'm enjoying what we're studying. And I mean, I was beaming. I was so excited. I was thinking, do we need to hurry and get to the end before I lose your attention? And they're like, can we not skip anything? Because I'm afraid when we get to lesson 6 or whatever, that's going to be the end, and then you're going to cut us loose. They were saying, don't urge me to leave, don't let me go. I'm committed to this. I want to keep doing this. And that's what Ruth is doing here. She says, don't turn me away. She's demonstrating her commitment. And then we see some specifics about her commitment. Ruth was willing to follow Naomi. She was committed to Naomi the person, right? Verse 16, she says, where you go, I will go. Here's the thing. Ruth saw something in Naomi worth clinging to, worth sticking with. More, I will say, and we'll talk about this more later, more than just a caring and conscientious mother-in-law. She saw something deeper than that, worth following, worth sticking with. Then also, Ruth wanted to associate, not just stick with the person of Naomi, but to associate with her people, with Israel, right? God's people. Verse 16, she said, your people shall be my people. Okay, that's significant. Ruth also wanted to make God her God, right? She was devoted. Verse 16, she says, and your God shall be my God, right? She's going to stick with Naomi the person. She's going to associate herself with God's people. And she wants to be devoted to God, to make God her God. Ruth was making a lifelong commitment too, because she said, until death, right? Verse 17, where you die, I will die. I'm not saying I'm going to do this for a time. I'm not saying I want to come back to Israel and see what it's like and make your God my God for a time. She said, where you die, I will die. I'm doing this forever, right? So she makes a commitment forever to Naomi, to Israel, and to God. That's significant, and we'll get our lesson from that, right? Here's our big lesson from this section that we just covered. It's this idea of your God shall be my God. As I keep saying, Ruth found more in Naomi than a concerned and conscientious mother-in-law. There's more to this. Elimelech's family had something that the Moabites didn't have. What was that? Yeah, God. Despite the fact that Elimelech, I got caught up. I was skipping there for a second. Despite the fact that Elimelech did put his family into a kind of a dangerous position, taking them to Moab and handing his sons, these Moabite women, as their wives, despite that, Elimelech's family had something that the Moabites didn't have, and that was, the one true God and his plan for living, his better purpose for life. Naomi, or Ruth, had come to know the one true God through Elimelech's family. She wouldn't have known when she said, "Your God will be my God." She had to know about that God. She had to know about that God by being associated with this family. They were Jews. They had been in Bethlehem. They were God's people, the Israelites, and she had spent significant time with them. She had been married to these people. She had married into this family. You learn about that family and what their beliefs are, what their convictions are. You learn about those things when you marry into a family. So evidently, Ruth was willing to leave her Moabite family, her people, and her pagan gods. Evidently, she had learned enough about this one true God to convince her that life with the Lord's people was more valuable than sticking to these things, more valuable than staying with her Moabite family, more valuable than staying with the Moabite people and worshiping the pagan gods. She saw something in Elimelech's family through Naomi, through her husbands perhaps, their husbands, Orpah and Ruth, through their husbands. Ruth saw something that taught her about God, that it's worth leaving all this behind to follow all the way to her grave Naomi, her people, and her God. That's powerful, and that's the biggest part of our lesson here. What is your personal spiritual influence in your family? What should it be? Proverbs 22:6, you guys are probably familiar with that. Train up a child in the way that he should go. We have a responsibility to train up our children in this. If we've got children in the household, if we've got grandchildren, if we have influence here in the church on the children who come into our assemblies, we have a command. We have a duty to train up these children, to show them the way of the Lord. They shouldn't be among us and not learn about our God. Okay, Ephesians chapter 5. Go ahead and flip over there to Ephesians chapter 5. We're going to talk about a couple things from 5 and 6 here. Got some family relationship stuff here that's mentioned. If we look at verses 22 and through 24, Ephesians chapter 5, starting in verse 22. It says, "Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is also the head of the church. He himself being the Savior of the body." That's Jesus. "But as the church is subject to Christ, so also wives ought to be subject to their husbands in everything." Also look at verse 33. It says, "Nevertheless, each individual among you is also to love his own wife, even as himself. And the wife must see to it that she respects her husband." So wives, we see that they're to respect their husbands in a way that demonstrates their subjection to the Lord. The way we love, I'm not a wife, I keep saying we. The way you love your husbands can and should be a reflection of your respect, love, and subjection to the Lord himself, is what that's saying. Ephesians 5:25. If we look at verse 25, we got some information about husbands. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her. And also in verse 33, there was some information that we read about for the husband as well, right? It says, that each individual among you also is to love his own wife even as himself. There's a way that husbands can love their wives that demonstrates their love for the Lord. There's a way that within the family we should be showing our love for, our devotion to, our respect and honor, our reverence for the Lord. The way we treat our family, the way we interact with our family literally shows how much we love God. Literally, like this is how Ruth saw this. Ruth saw this through the way Elimelech's family carried on business. They did it the Israelite way. They did it the God's people way. All right? Look at Ephesians chapter 6 now. We got some stuff about children. Ephesians 6, 1 through 3 says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth. All right? Children, you're to honor your parents, honor your father and mother. It says in the Lord. Okay? In the Lord. There's a way that children are supposed to behave. So Mahlon and Chilion, Elimelech's sons, the way they respected and revered and honored their father and mother would have also been a telltale sign that this God is powerful, that this God has an order to the family that makes sense, and it's not chaos at home. I know sometimes we think it is chaos at home, but it needs to not be literal chaos. There are messy moments for all of us, but doing things God's way, we should have the kids in order. We should have the kids obeying their parents and honoring their father and mother. Guys, I'm telling you, Ruth saw something in this family. We should, no matter whether we're the children in the family or the husband or the wife, whatever role we have in the family, we should be demonstrating a respect for, a reverence for God through even just the way we interact with each other. Ephesians 6 verse 4, more fatherly stuff. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. See, we as fathers are supposed to be instructing our children in the discipline, the instruction of the Lord. No one should walk into our household and spend any period of time like Ruth and Orpah did, marrying our children and have no knowledge about our God. In fact, they should know a lot about our God through marrying one of our sons or marrying one of our daughters, because of what we've taught them growing up, because we have brought them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And then 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, it says, in the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. All right? Guys, wives who find themselves married to unbelievers even are instructed to respect and honor those husbands in such a way that they just might win them to Christ simply by their outstanding attitude and behavior. That's what a difference following God ought to make in your influence among your family. There ought to be an impact. We're not to be in a situation where people could, again, spend any time among us and not learn about our God. So, would others see a God worth leaving their old lives behind for? If they looked at you, if they looked at your family, if they looked into your home life and things like that. Does your faith, does your family's faith convince others that God is worth leaving behind their old lives for brand new lives with Him and among His people? Matthew chapter 5, verse 16 was our memory verse last month, right? Matthew 5:16, let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven, right? Let your light shine. Man, is your light on? You know, are your good works shining brightly for people to see? That they need to be? Or is your light off? Is it dark? Are you leaving the world in darkness because you aren't doing anything in the kingdom? You aren't serving in any way, shape, or form. There's really nothing to witness. Right? Ruth could come among you and marry one of your sons, and she'd learn nothing because nothing is happening for God. You know, is your light on or is your light off? Can anybody see the Lord because the light of the Lord is on in your life? That's a good question, guys. Even in Elimelech's imperfect family, Ruth was able to see and choose the Lord. Remember, Elimelech, the reason I say imperfect is because Elimelech brought his family into Moab, dangerous territory. Remember, Naomi believed that God, for some reason, had decided to lift His hand against her. But even still, Ruth, among this Israelite family, was able to see God, was able to see His plan, was able to see that His people were better. All these things, His plan, His people, this God, all of this was better than Moab's gods. All of this was better than her own personal desires. All of this was better than even her own Moabite family. Ruth was able to see that because these people were God's people. So while we might face our own struggles in living out our faith, there ought to be enough commitment. There ought to be plenty of dedication, plenty of striving, enough effort and labor for the Lord that others can clearly see the goodness of God and, like Ruth, say, your God shall be my God. All right? That's lesson 1. Let's see if we can move on. The next one's real short. All right? I promise you. It's just a couple slides. So if we go on to verse 19 now, we're skipping on to verse 19. We asked the question, was Naomi's return home, or how was Naomi's return home seen by others and seen by herself? All right? This is not terribly difficult to gather up here. Verses 19 through 21 said, so they both went until they came to Bethlehem. This is Naomi and her daughter-in-law Ruth who clung to her. And when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? She said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me and the Almighty has afflicted me? So how did others see her return home? Well, there was some level of excitement. I'm not saying excitement in the sense of, yay, they're home. I mean, just they were excited. It elicited a reaction in them. It says in verse 19, all the city was stirred because of them. That's not a some people noticed kind of thing. That's not a situation where, they snuck in, but a couple people saw it. All the city was stirred because of them. This was noticeable. It seems that it was more of a concern to the women. Maybe it was only the women, even though it says all the city. It says that it was the women who said, is this Naomi, right? In verse 19, it says, and the women said, is this Naomi? Is this Naomi? What does that tell us about their reaction? What they're seeing is different than what went out, right? What they saw was a family that was seeking to provide for themselves, right? There's famine in the land. Elimelech says, guys, he felt like this is the decision we need to take. And as the head of the house took them out to Moabite territory. When she left, she had a husband and 2 young sons of marriageable age. Is that a word? Anyway, she went out with all the things that make a mother's heart, a wife's heart rich, right? She went out full. She went out full in that way. Maybe not with gold and silver, certainly not with land and livestock, because they were traveling a great distance to a foreign country to who knows what lay on the other side. So not full of possessions, but full of, like I said, all that makes a wife and mother's heart rich. She went out full, but she had come back different. And that's why, I believe that's why they say, is this Naomi? Is this the same one who left? That just 10 years ago, I know a lot can happen in 10 years. We talked about that last week. But just 10 years ago, went out Naomi the gracious, Naomi the full, Naomi with all that life could, all that could be asked for and expected of in life, with more ahead in her life. Her sons still yet to be married, still had lots of great moments and memories to make, despite a famine in the land and having to flee, albeit, I'll give you that. But is this Naomi? Is this the gracious who we remember? I don't think she probably looked gracious. She came back empty. I think she probably looked different. Not just, I don't mean more wrinkles or anything like that. I mean, I think her demeanor was probably different. I don't think she looked like she was gracious. I don't think she probably looked like she had experienced grace or graciousness in her life. I think she looked like she says she felt. And we'll talk about that in a second. I think she looked gloomy. I think she looked down and broken and hurt by all this. And so is this Naomi? Is this the one who went out full, the one who was gracious? I think they saw someone who came back not so gracious. No husbands, no sons, alone with the exception of Ruth. Now, what about Naomi? How does she view herself? How does she view her own return? Bitter, painful, defeated. She said, don't call me Naomi, which remember means gracious. Don't call me Naomi. Don't call me gracious. Call me Mara. Verse 20, she says, the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. That's what Mara means. I know a lot of you know that, but Mara means bitter. That's why she said, call me Mara, for the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. And she talks about all this bitterness that she's been dealt by the Lord, that he's dealt bitterly with her. She says, call me Mara, which means the bitter one, or one who has experienced bitterness. She makes some bold statements, ones that I'm not so sure she wouldn't take back by the end of chapter 4. But here's what she says. She says, the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. She's accusing the Lord of mistreating her. She says, the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. He's done things to me that are mean. He's done things to me that hurt. All right? He's mistreated me. She says, I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Again, the things she went out full of are things that, man, everybody wants in their life. A husband, 2 healthy children. She gained some daughter-in-laws while she was out there in the land of Moab, but she came back lacking all of those. Well, she came back lacking a lot, not all of those things. She got to keep Ruth. But I want you to also think about that. How do you think that would make Ruth feel when she tells all these people, don't even call me Naomi anymore, call me Mara because I'm empty, I have nothing? What value does that assign to Ruth, who said, I'm with you for life all the way to my grave. Your people are my people. Your God will be my God. Nothing's going to separate us besides death. How do you think that makes Ruth feel that she says, don't call me Naomi the gracious. I have nothing. I'm empty now. That would make her value feel like it's equal to empty. Nothing, right? So she said, the Lord mistreated. He's dealt bitterly with me. Now she says, the Lord took. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. She's accusing the Lord of taking everything away from her. So the Lord took. And then it says, she says, the Lord has witnessed against me. So she's saying the Lord speaks against her. The Lord's telling other people that I'm not worth his time, or I'm the object of his wrath. The Lord is testifying against her. Almost like she's the one that says, hey, don't get too close. Lightning could strike at any minute. She's accusing the Lord of having taken all these things from her and speaking now against her. He's testified, he's witnessed against me. And then she says, the Lord Almighty has afflicted me. The Lord has harmed me. So if you look at her 4 statements, that he's dealt bitterly with me, he's brought me back empty, he's witnessed against me, and he's afflicted me. She says, the Lord mistreated me, the Lord took from me, the Lord speaks against me, and the Lord harmed me. That's some bold statements to make. That's probably not the right word to use, but those are statements I wouldn't want to make, and I'm not saying I'm not saying I'm above having made those before. I'm saying, looking at it from the outside, looking in, I'm like, ooh, Naomi, I wish you wouldn't say things like that. All right? Naomi seems to think God's working against her, testifying against her. And perhaps some of these circumstances were brought on in disciplinary ways. Maybe, hey, you go into Moabite territory, like we said, maybe it wasn't friendly to the Jews. Maybe it was so hostile that it got these guys killed. I mean, it's possible that these things could happen, but God is in the process right now. Right now in her life, at this point in chapter 1, God is in the process of guiding her to a better place. He's not testifying against her. He's not hurting her. If any of this was punishment, she's on the right track now. But she's going, the Lord testifies against me. The Lord deals bitterly with me. He took everything from me. Well, right now, he's got you back in his land with his people going in the right direction. And we have the blessing of knowing the rest of the story. We know redemption is right around the corner, but she's in this place of, I'm not Naomi, I'm Mara, I've been dealt bitterly with by God. All right? Verse 22, last verse of the chapter. When did Naomi and Ruth return to Bethlehem from Moab? This is important to know. This isn't information that's just given to us for no reason. So Naomi returned, it says in verse 22, and with her Ruth the Moabitess. Or sometimes I like to read that, and with her, no, never mind, forget that joke. I won't even forget it. Verse 22, so Naomi returned, and with her Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, who returned from the land of Moab. And listen to this. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. So when did they return? When did Naomi and Ruth return from Moab? What do we know? At the beginning of barley harvest. So it was harvest time, but it was a specific harvest time. Barley harvest, okay? Barley was the first crop that would have been harvested by the Jews. I'm not going to read these, but you can write down, if you're taking notes, you can write down Leviticus 23, verses 10 through 12. Leviticus 23, 10 through 12. That's gonna tell you about the significant, if I'm going to talk at all about the significance, it probably needs to get read. Let's just read it. Leviticus 23. Sorry, this is me trying to get this done by 7 and then realizing you need to read it. Jake. All right. Leviticus 23, 10 through 12 says, well, let's start at verse 9. It says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, When you enter the land which I am going to give you and reap its harvest, then you shall bring in the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord for you to be accepted. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. Now on the day when you wave the sheaf, you shall offer a male lamb, 1 year old, without defect, for a burnt offering to the Lord. All right, so we learned something about this is the barley harvest that's being talked about here. This is the first harvest that happens, and there's some significance here, right? This is going to go on to say that this needs to be perpetually observed. The people need to not just do this when they enter the land, but from now on, like the Passover, continue to celebrate this, continue to do this. They're going to take the barley, the barley leaf as it starts to ripen and starts to bear its grain. They're to take it to the priest, and the priest is to wave it to get the people to be accepted by the Lord. So there's significance to this waving, and this started off the whole harvest season. And from this, this is right around the time of the Passover. From that point, from the barley harvest and that waving, we count out 7 weeks to get to Pentecost. Passover and this barley harvest go hand in hand. From these things, we count out the 49 and 1 day to get to Pentecost. All this stuff is intertwined and connected. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds or the barley because that's not necessarily significant to what we're talking about here today. But I do want you to know a little bit about this. The barley crop would ripen in the springtime. The first fruits, as we read, were brought to the priests. The priest would wave that barley sheaf on the day after the Sabbath. What day is that? Sunday. The Sabbath is Saturday. The day after the Sabbath is Sunday, okay? I know I did not ask the question probably as clearly as I should have. So Sunday is the day they're doing this. This was for the people to be accepted. And notice on the same day, a male lamb without defect was to be sacrificed. And this all, like I said, happened around the time of the Passover. If you want to jot down Exodus 9, 31 and 32, I'm not going to read that one, but Exodus 9, 31 and 32 does show us that during the time they were in Egypt, it references the barley and some other crops that were ruined because of the time of the year it was, but some others that would ripen later on were preserved. Well, the barley, because of springtime, it was destroyed because that's when all that was going on, which was around Passover. And anyway, I don't know if I'm making sense of all this or not. I know what I'm saying. I want to say it's Abib or Aviv, because the word, I'll have to look into that to tell you for sure. For sure. You may and probably are right, but there's something about that, crud. That word for that 1 month actually refers to the opening up of the grain. Man. I didn't know we were going to get into all this. I should have studied that. but I've read it before. I just don't, I'm just enough to be dangerous. Just enough to sit up here and go, all right. But I do know that it's the first crop that would be harvested, the barley was, and they did have this special celebration, this process they had to go through with the priests where they would wave it to be accepted. So what I want us to know, because all of that is a little bit peripheral, I just want you to know there's something behind all this, because what we need to know is that the time that Ruth and Naomi are entering Bethlehem is a time of celebration. It is a time of joy and expectation. It is a time when things are ramping up in Bethlehem, in the land of Judah. It's the time of harvest. So Naomi and Ruth were arriving at an exciting time, a joyful time. Think about spring and how we view spring. We've all been holed up in our homes for a while. It's been cold, and where we live, it might have been 70, or it might have been, -5. I don't know, but winter is just like that, and it's chilly. Springtime things bloom, things start to ripen, things start to green out. Trees in our yard that, are not that pretty in the winter, they might get beautiful in the springtime. Like it starts. And in the summertime, can we see the exact same stuff? Sure. But when is it exciting? In the spring, because it's all starting. It's all just getting going. That's when they're arriving. And there's significance to that because it all is the beginning of redemption. It's all the beginning of harvest. It's the beginning of things getting better, things greening up and getting God giving us what He's promised us, right? Naomi and Ruth were arriving in time to partake in the joy and the blessings of the entire harvest because it was a process. Barley harvest was first, but it went on and on and on for a while with all the different crops. They were getting there in time, like I said, to partake in the joy and the blessings of the entire harvest season. So after a season of death and loss for Naomi, after that, it was time now for resurrection, rebirth, new life, and a great harvest. God's preparing her for that. God's preparing Ruth to participate in that and to be part of that. This is all setting the stage, this idea of them coming in at the beginning of barley harvest. It's like they hadn't missed anything yet. They were getting there just in time to receive what God was going to give them, okay? So let's look real quick at the big lesson here, and then we'll wrap up, and that'll get us, I think, on pace to keep this where we can finish this summer. All right. I know that sounds dramatic. It's just the second week, but I'm trying to stay on track. Lesson number 3 is just call me Mara. I want us to learn something from this. When Naomi came back, like we said, she was recognized by the people, in a way welcomed by her people, now widowed and sonless though, and they asked if she was really Naomi. We saw that, we talked about that. Apparently there was some concern that Naomi was, without her husband, without her son. She was carrying herself different. She didn't look like Naomi the gracious. We covered that. Naomi went from gracious to bitter. She went from Naomi to Mara, and that is not just in her attitude. I mean, she actually did go through circumstances that were not so gracious. She went through circumstances that took from her. I don't necessarily sign up with her on the accusing God of dealing bitterly with her, but she went through bitter circumstances. She went through difficult things for sure. So in multiple ways, she went from gracious to bitter. But yes, also in her attitude and her outlook, she went from gracious to bitter. She's bitter because she believed believed she had experienced the bitterness of God. But guys, many of us are going to face stuff like this. As it says, Christians are going to face similar circumstances. God is not bitter toward His children. What He's actually doing, He's being a good Father who disciplines and allows difficulties in our lives to strengthen us. We're going to face losses in life of people, of family members. We're going to face losses of friends. We're going to face losses of property and losses of things that are important and valuable to us. Those things are going to happen. Relationships aren't always going to be cut off by death either. People are going to just decide they don't want any more to do with us. These things are going to happen in our life. We're going to have to cut off relationships and leave, and it's going to be difficult. These things are going to happen in the life of a Christian, and it's not God being bitter towards you. It's not God testifying against you, but it is an opportunity for you to be strengthened. All right, look at Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 4. Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 4. It says, "You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin, and you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by Him. For those whom the Lord loves, He disciplines, and He scourges every son whom He receives. It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as His sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time," talking about our earthly fathers, "as seemed best to them. But He disciplines us for our good, so that we may share His holiness. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, Afterwards, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Therefore, strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble, and make straight paths for your feet, so that the limb which is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Perhaps in some ways God was disciplining the family of Elimelech for taking his family to Moabite territory. Naomi admitted it. She said, I went away. We went away, right? She said she went away. Remember when she said she went away full and came back empty? She admits, I left the house of bread. I left the Lord's land. I left Hebrew people. I left that behind. Maybe some of this, maybe some of these consequences were reaping what they had sown. It is possible. But Hebrews 12 reminds us that we need to understand the value of discipline. Say God is allowing this to happen, not making it happen. It's evil men and it's the cursed world that brings on disease. Like, that's what creates these situations. But maybe God was allowing them to reap what they sow in some way. Hebrews 12 reminds us to understand the value of discipline. Don't write it off and say it's just awful and every bit of it is bitter. There's something to be learned. There's something we can be strengthened by it. We need to understand that. So we need to ask ourselves what we're going to do about it. What's our response going to be? Are we going to be gracious? Are we going to be bitter? Remember that God loves us enough not to spoil us. He loves us enough not to spoil us, but rather to allow us to experience difficult situations, difficult moments, and opportunities. They're opportunities to grow in our faith and our trust in Him. How are we going to respond? What are we going to do? Guys, when hard times come, when great loss comes, what are we going to do? Well, we need to consider it all joy, don't we? Turn to James chapter 1. If you're in Hebrews, just flip right over to James. James chapter 1. In verse 2, it says, consider it all joy, my brethren, when everything goes great. Consider it all joy when the masses would consider it good. No, it says, consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials. Consider it all joy when you encounter various trials. There's a reason to find joy in trials, in difficult times. There's a reason to appreciate hard circumstances like we talked about, right? And that reason is related to the next thing we need to do when hard times come. We got to remember the goal. We got to remember the intended results, the intended benefits of difficult moments. Right there, if you continue on in James, in verses 3 and 4, it says, after it says to consider these trials as joy, he says, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. See, if there wasn't a result, if there wasn't a benefit, there would be absolutely no reason to consider something that was not great as good. There'd be no reason to find joy in something difficult or hard or bad unless there was a reason for it. Unless, like that's what we want most of the time. Somebody just explain to me why this is happening. Well, maybe I can't explain to you why it's happening, but I can explain to you the good that can come from it. How's that help? Quite a bit, right? Verse 3, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. See, testing of faith produces endurance, and that endurance leads to greater maturity. And guys, maturity is being available, being prepared. I don't know where that word came from. Maturity is being better prepared to handle situations better. To be able to handle situations, we say in a mature way. Well, what do we mean when we say a mature way? We mean better than somebody who doesn't know how to handle it the right way, right? So these things can test us. These things can prepare us, can produce endurance, can make it so that we can stay the course. It's necessary, and this is how the universe works, guys. Scientists found this out in Arizona. Some of you probably have heard of this, and lately I feel like I'm talking about it every time I turn around. All these Bible studies that are going on right now, I keep using this example, but have you guys, anybody heard about the biosphere that the University of Arizona scientists did? Yeah. Desert land, right, in Arizona, these scientists tried to create the largest dome. It's a big glass bubble, essentially. Huge. I wish I knew how huge it was. Right now I'm feeling like I need to tell you, and I don't know that information. But it was the largest enclosed environment ever. They had, and I think even to this day, they were trying to create like their own atmosphere within this giant dome. And so they had tropical plants, tropical wildlife. Like, they had stuff that should not be in the Arizona desert growing. And they were elated to see all this stuff growing and thriving to begin with. Now, the trees popped right up, looked beautiful, grew quicker even than normal in the outside environment, but under their own weight, they just fell over. And scientists were puzzled by it to begin with. They didn't know why it was happening. Why do they look so beautiful? Why did they grow so fast and then fall over? Maybe it's got something to do with how fast they grew. Well, why did that happen? They were puzzled. They were troubled. And then they figured out what the issue was. There was no wind. They had good soil. They had all the other conditions right. Sunlight, the ability to get light, plenty of water. In fact, they were watered more or in better quantities, the precise measurements that they should be, rather than just getting rain and how much rain, however the environment decided to give it. They had all those things in place, but there was no wind. Nothing pushing them around, nothing stressing them, nothing breaking them, nothing causing them to bend day in, day out, nothing pushing against them. They needed wind. They needed to be bent and pushed around and blown back and forth. They figured out that this actually created things that weren't created unless there was that stress. Literally, it created what they call stress wood. Anybody know a little bit about stress wood or what that is? It's got a different molecular structure than the rest of the tree. The stress wood, the stuff that's created by the bending and the back and forth, when the trees would go like this and kind of a little bit of breakage would happen, what would create in that area that repaired the tree, that strengthened the tree, they called stress wood. It literally had a different molecular structure than the rest of the wood. So what that told them is that without wind, there were some things the tree couldn't even do. Some things the tree wouldn't even have available. Some things the tree would never learn even if it didn't have this stress. You ask, what did it learn? How can a tree learn something? We all know, I think all of us in this room know that plants can do funny things, like trees can grow crooked because the sunlight's over here. Plants can go over here because that's from stress. That's the stress wood, the different molecular structure. When those things recognize there's an issue here, there's a problem, everything is not exactly as it should be, those things will cause it to go this way. Trees that are crooked will be crooked because they're going after sunlight. They're going after resources that they don't have otherwise. Without that stress wood, without that different molecular structure that wouldn't be gained without the wind, without the stress, without the difficulty against the tree, they wouldn't have any of those things. They learn resilience and the ability to overcome. The tree learns in that way. And it's not a far leap to get what I'm getting at, right? Without these things, we don't have so much. We are missing out on so much. We are lacking so many things. We never take the time to learn how to overcome this, how to overcome that. We never take the time to figure out how we get through something like that in life. We don't even have the capability. We don't possess within us. We come to one point where we're stressed, and if we haven't been stressed before, we don't have within us the ability to overcome that. So we have to go through things. We have to get some stress wood of our own to be able to be resilient, to be able to overcome, to be able to learn and have the power and the ability to do those things. Does that make sense? So these things are essential. And then something else we should do is certainly we should pray. If you look at Philippians 4, flip over there real quick with me if you would. Philippians chapter 4, starting in verse 4. Philippians chapter 4, starting in verse 4. It says, "Rejoice in the Lord always." Again, I will say rejoice. "Let your gentle spirit be known to all men. The Lord is near. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." So rejoice, be gentle, and pray. Rather than being anxious, be thankful and pray. Right? We see pray, pray, pray. In everything, pray. Right? In everything, go to God. Let your requests be made known to God. Remember 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, cast all your anxiety upon Him. Because why? Because he cares for you. So when you're getting blown around by the winds, when you're being stressed and the tree is bending and you want to learn not to wilt under your own weight, not to collapse under your own weight, but to be prepared, one of the things we have to do is pray. We have to let our requests be made known to God. That anxiety that's being created, those winds in our lives, take them and give them to God because he cares for you. Tell him about it. Talk to him about it. Pray about it. And what's it say? You'll experience the peace of God. I mean, it makes sense. If you give God your anxiety and you say, God, you help me with this. God, I understand that it's valuable. I know the intended results and the goals, and so I'm going to consider it joy. But you go to God with that. That process, you can see how the peace of God would then guard your heart, would guard your mind. Because that wind that's coming at you in life, that stress, those difficult moments and stuff, that threatens your heart. That threatens your mind. That attacks your heart and your mind. When you pray the way God says here, not being anxious, but giving the anxiety over to him, with prayer, with thanksgiving, when you let your request be made known to God, that guards your heart and your mind. The peace that God will give you through that process, it will guard your heart and your mind, protect your heart and your mind. Last thing we should do, and I can make this quick, is praise his holy name. And this is not just something I thought, you know what, we need a fourth one, praise his holy name. This is something we should do. Let's go back to our old friend Job real quick. Old Job gives us a good example here. Job chapter 1. And some of you, I don't doubt, know exactly where I'm going. Job chapter 1, verses 20 through 22. Job chapter 1, verses 20 through 22 says, Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. You guys remember, this is after some great loss, some great tragedy in his life. So he fell to the ground and worshipped. He said, Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Through all this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. So very quickly, verse 20, Job was grieving, he was mourning, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. That word does not mean what we think it means. When we hear the word worship, when I say we, I mean the religious world has all kinds of different ideas. He fell to the ground and worshiped. What, did he get out an electric guitar and put up some lights and sing a religious song? Some people call that worshiping, right? It's time for worship now. Let's have the band come up so we can worship. That's not worship. Some people think it's just the reverence that you have for God, and it encompasses that. But there are literal different words for worship in the Bible. We get the word worship almost every time. Every once in a while we get the word bow down for it instead. But there are different words in the Hebrew, different words in the Greek that were used that get translated as worship almost every single time. In this time, all it literally meant was that he bowed down in a way that shows reverence for a higher position. That shows like you would do before a king, that you would do before royalty. It is a respect for, it's a physical action that demonstrates the respect for the power and the position. Okay, so Job fell down in the midst of what he was doing, in the midst of what he had gone through, I should say. He fell down and he worshiped in that way. He fell down and honored the power and the position of God. Verse 21, he recognized that anything he had was a gift that God had given to him. Sounds like James 1:17, right? Every good thing given comes down from God above, right? He recognized that anything he had was a gift. Wasn't owed to him. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. It's his. So we should be thankful we ever had it. You know what I mean? That's the way Job seemed to see it. And then verse 22, through all this, as it says, all this, think about what all this entailed. Through all this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. We can't say the same thing for Naomi, but we can say the same thing for ourselves. If we'll learn this lesson and not be someone who says, just call me Mara, but instead says, I'm going to consider it all joy. I'm going to understand the intended results and the benefits of this stress. I'm going to understand that I need to pray and give my anxiety to God and cast those cares on him. I'm going to understand all of these things, and I'm going to praise his holy name at the end of the day because everything I have was given to me by him. So if I went out full and I return empty, hey, praise his name, I was full. Praise his name, I'm still alive. Because remember, she came back. Even Naomi came back. She said she came back empty, but she came back with life She came back with land, and she came back with love. Life, in that she had her own life still to live. She had glory to give to God. She had land. We'll find that out later on in chapter 4, that there was some land of Elimelech's, her husband, that needed to be sold. So she had land waiting for her in Bethlehem. So she came back and had property there. She said, I returned empty. And she had love. She had Ruth, who didn't kiss her goodbye, but clung to her, I should say. Clung to her. So she had those three things. And guys, every time we think that, just call me Mara, I've been dealt with bitterly, look what I'm going through, we've got things. Maybe it's not land, I don't know, but we've got life. And if we're part of the church, we got love. If we're associated with God and His people, we got love from Him. We got love from one another. We've got things to be thankful for, not bitter for, but gracious for. All right, that's the lessons for tonight. Thank you for hanging with me. I know we went over a little bit, but I'm so glad we got chapter 1 accomplished. We'll jump into chapter 2 next week.